Welcome. It's becoming a tradition here that from time to time I share with you a book that is deeply meaningful to me and that I feel is also going to be deeply meaningful to you. Today it's going to be more of a topic rather than one particular book, and I'll be quoting just a little bit from different books concerning the same topic. Now, whenever we talk about books or topics here, it's not an academic discussion. It's not about ultimately anything outside of you. It is just one way of looking at the essential truth that is inseparable from who you are. And so that applies to any spiritual teaching. It would be pointless to discuss a spiritual teaching as a subject outside of you, although that's done a lot at universities. And in that way you can accumulate knowledge. But basically what that means is that you are a collector of maps and you're discussing the merits or otherwise of maps and compare one map to other maps, but never go to where the map points. You never go to the territory, you just look at the map of the territory, and that would be studying these things as a subject outside of you, as it's done academically. And if you enjoy that, that's fine, it's just another activity, another way of accumulating knowledge, but it is not a way of knowing, arriving at that place within yourself where conceptual knowledge is transcended and where you know from the depth of your being. And that's, of course, what ultimately all the spiritual teachings are about, for you to find that place. Spiritual teachings are not here to ultimately give you information, but to help you uncover that which is already a reality within you. In that sense, nothing needs to be added to you. And while we are here now, spending some time, I'm not adding anything to you, but what we are attempting to do is using, in this case, a spiritual teaching that is quite old, ancient, but still alive, using that as a way of accessing the deeper dimension in yourself. So it should be quite enjoyable. If it's not enjoyable, it's not working. So we can relax. There's nowhere to go as such on the horizontal dimension of life, but only go more deeply into the vertical, so nowhere to go in terms of space and time. When I don't remember, when it was many years ago, my brother or half-brother came to see me. My brother is 20 years younger than me, and at that time he was 17. He came to see me and said, I just saw a movie. It's an Indiana Jones movie, I think that's what it was. And he said, you should see that because there's a character in there that's just like you. So I said, well, that's strange. What am I doing in an Indiana Jones movie? He said, well, he doesn't look like you at all, but he is like you. I can't explain. He said, you'll just have to see it. So my curiosity aroused. Following week, I went to see the movie. And I was pleasantly surprised. This character turned out to be a Sufi master, a relatively young man. And the title of the movie was The Jewel of the Nile. Not particularly profound film, entertaining with a lot of action, but it had this character who played a Sufi master, and the exceptional thing about the film, and my brother must have intuited that, the exceptional thing about the film was that this character, the Sufi master, functions in the film with virtually no ego. So he's whether the scriptwriter or the director did that consciously or whether they were guided and it just turned out that way unconsciously, I don't know. But it's a wonderful teaching just to watch this character move about and speak from an egoless place. So if you ever want to see it, it's called The Jewel of the Nile. It's probably still available in DVD. It's just worth seeing for this character. So that's a Sufi. And then I became more interested in the Sufis. I had heard of Sufis, as most people have. Sufism goes back a long, long time, over 1,000 years. And it's usually described as the mystical branch of Islam. And when one speaks of Sufis, what comes to mind for most people, unless they haven't even heard of that, is the whirling dervishes, dervishes are Sufis who have taken vows of poverty, and they perform ecstatic dances. They go round and round in circles, so they're the whirling dervishes. And they're even howling dervishes and singing dervishes, so they have practices that are quite vigorous and undoubtedly result in the cessation of thinking, because you can't be whirling around like that and still continue to think. So anyway, I became a bit more interested in the Sufis, and I looked at a few books, and I saw that the Sufi masters all point to that most essential place within you. And their teaching, although it came out of Islam, it transcends, as every true, deep spiritual teaching does, it transcends the form out of which it comes. In the same way that, for example, Zen, or that's come out of Buddhism, transcends Buddhism, in the same way that the great Christian mystics of the Middle Ages transcend the narrow form of Christianity. And of course, very often they were persecuted for that by Orthodox Christians, in the same way that the Sufis were, some of them, were persecuted and killed by Orthodox Muslims, and still are. Nowadays especially, when we speak of Islam, we think of it as or many people think of it as an intolerant religion, but any religion can be turned into that. And if you look back to the Middle Ages, you'll see that Islam was far more tolerant at that time than Christianity. And Islam at that time had a far more highly developed civilization than the Christian civilization of Europe, or Central Europe. Islam was in Southern Europe also. So today I'd like to go with you as deeply as possible into the heart of the Sufi teachings, or use the Sufi teachings as a device to access that place within yourself. I was happy to see, before we go into all that, I was happy to see a few months ago an article in the New York Times where the very peaceful nature of Sufism was acknowledged, and where they reported that even nowadays Sufism is regarded by the Orthodox fanatics as an enemy of Islam. And I'm going to just read to you, before we go into it, a little clipping from the New York Times. It was written a few months ago about Sufism nowadays. In the most radical parts of the Muslim world, Sufi leaders risk their lives for their tolerant beliefs every bit as bravely as American troops on the ground in Baghdad and Kabul do. Sufism is the most pluralistic incarnation of Islam, accessible to the learned and the ignorant, the faithful and non-believers, and is thus a uniquely valuable bridge between East and West. The great Sufi saints, like the 13th century Persian poet Rumi, held that all existence and all religions were one, all manifestations of the same divine reality. What was important was not the empty ritual of the mosque, church, synagogue, or temple, but the striving to understand that divinity can best be reached through the gateway of the human heart. That we all can find paradise within us if we know where to look. In some ways, Sufism, with its emphasis on love rather than judgment, represents the New Testament of Islam. While the West remains blind to the divisions and distinctions within Islam, the challenge posed by the Sufi vision of the faith is not lost on the extremists. This was shown most violently on July the 2nd, last year, when the Pakistani Taliban organized a double suicide bombing of the Data Darbar, the largest Sufi shrine in Lahore, Pakistan's second largest city. The attack took place on a Thursday night when the shrine was at its busiest. 42 people were killed and 175 were injured. This was only the latest in a series of assaults against Pakistan's Sufis. And then it goes on to talk about other attacks on the Sufis.